Okay. What happened to the purple hat? I don't want to see it, but I just don't want it to like jump out at me later and surprise me. I want to just be aware. It's so retro.
There's something wrong with retro.
I'm just joking. That's not actually the word I would use to describe it, but that's the word I'm going to use so that Emily doesn't leap out of her chair onto my neck. Okay. Can you guys all hear me all right?
Unfortunately.
Ready to get started? All right. Welcome to Metamorphosis, year number 2. Yay! I'm excited. I think Hannah's the most excited because she didn't even bring her phone today. She just wants to.
She forgot it.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, and that is a good thing though. How about you guys, just to show respect, not have your phones or things like that out. Only tablet. I just have my notes on this. So use that. I do want you guys to use, keep all hats underneath. Well, Ben's hat is fine, but Emily's hat needs to be stored away and probably destroyed in that furnace at the end of Toy Story 3. Okay, so welcome to Metamorphosis year 2. And there's going to be a little bit different style this year. Last year, do you guys remember what we did for Metamorphosis?
12.
Romans 12. And Romans 12 is a great chapter for living the Christian life. We got so many good lessons out of that. And I was really excited just to see what God was doing in some of your lives too, whenever you applied yourselves. And we're studying the stuff that we were studying. And then a few times last summer, we got out the JBQ buzzers, and we just had our own Metamorphosis quiz match. We'll do that again this year. Probably like after 3 or 4 lessons, we'll do one. But this year, what I want to do is the book of Daniel. The reason for that, I was reading an article a couple weeks ago that was really opening my eyes to some stuff. And it said, we have left Rome and we're entering Babylon. In America, we have left Rome and we're entering Babylon. Now, what that means is, in the Bible, Rome was a nation that occupied the territory of Israel. That's where Jesus was. You know, in the stories about Jesus, Rome was in charge of that territory of land. And so Rome was controlling them. Now, Rome did not like Christians, but Rome was the kind of nation where there were a lot of philosophers and people liked to talk about different ideas. And so they would listen to you. They wanted to talk about, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? So they were open to it in that sense. And a lot of people got saved in Rome. So Rome, even though Rome did persecute Christians, they were a more friendly atmosphere. And they weren't, it was a bad place to be in, but it wasn't the worst. Now, Babylon was the worst. And America is moving, now America doesn't even do the things that Rome did, but America is moving from a Rome type of atmosphere where people have liked to discuss ideas. Christianity has had a strong influence in America, and that influence is shrinking. America is moving into more of a Babylon. This is what Babylon wants to do. Babylon wants to take your ideas and expose them to the world and tell you how stupid you are, and they want to hunt you down, and they would just want to drag you into the city square and make people laugh at you or persecute you, much in the way that Rome did. That's what Babylon wants to do to you too. And America is not really a Christian nation anymore. But you see a lot of people who just want to attack Christians and Christian ideas. And they will attack your intelligence and say you're dumb for being a Christian. They'll attack your character and say you're evil for being a Christian. And they have all these ways that they want to squash out Christianity. Now, believers in God, they did not have a lot of influence whenever they were in Babylon. Daniel was one of these believers in God, and he went to Babylon. Only, even though Daniel stayed true to God, he did not change Babylon and really make Babylon like a Christian atmosphere, like what was going on in Rome. Daniel just had to stay a strong Christian in the midst of this nation that was just kind of evil. And so what I want to do is, as America is getting more and more Babylonian and turning more and more against God's people, what I want to do is look at the life of Daniel. And that's just the direction we're going to go in this Metamorphosis this year. And I don't think there's as many people as last year. Hunter will probably be with us after this. That is okay with me. I just want a good success rate no matter how many people we have. And so I'm glad you guys are here. I hope it's something that you want to stick with and something you find interesting. Last year with Metamorphosis, we had a strong emphasis on Bible memorization. And we tried to memorize the whole chapter of Romans 12. Some of you guys did that. Most of you guys didn't. It was a lot of verses. This year, we're not going to focus as much on Bible memorization, but it is still going to be a part of it. We're probably just going to try to attempt like one verse each week, which is very doable. And I'll give you the same printouts or like the little, business card size things. I'll give you those again so that you can practice the verses. They're not going to be 12 verses in a row, but each week I'm just going to find one verse that goes with the story from Daniel's life that we're doing, and we can use that. I just want you guys to memorize that. Very easy to memorize one verse a week. Last year we would try 2 or 3 or 4 verses a week, and this year we're just going to do 1 a week. So I think that's something that we can all try to work on together. We'll still do the quiz matches every few weeks, and so the memorizing the verses will come in there, handy there. If you brought your Bible, you can use that. What I did is I put all of my notes in the New King James Version of the Bible, because those are all the ones located under the chairs. So if you want to use like the version of the Bible I'm reading out of, you can grab one from underneath the chairs. If you want to use your own Bible, that's fine too. So if you don't bring your Bible, it's really okay, as long as you bring a pen, because I can't give pens to everyone. Who needs a pen? Anyone? Okay, we'll start off with the background of Daniel. Before we talk about what's going on in the first chapter, let's talk about the background. What is the story of Daniel? If you really want to understand a book of the Bible, you need to understand what its place is in history. Does anyone know any stories from Daniel that are maybe kind of famous to them? Anyone know what you recognize? You've probably heard the name Daniel and know about Daniel and the lion's den. A lot of you guys know about Daniel and the lion's den. Another famous story from the book of Daniel is when his 3 friends were thrown into the fiery furnace. Yes. And so that story is coming up. Now, I've heard that one. That's one of the most famous stories in all the Bible. And you probably know it, but whenever we get there, I'm sure there are things in the story of the fiery furnace that we don't even know about. So there's probably little details and good stuff we can get out of that. So don't skip that week. There's some great stories in there. Here's the background of Daniel. Israel split off into 2 parts. You don't have to write this down, but you can if you want. Israel split into 2 parts. One part was called Judah. One part kept the name Israel. Now, Israel was kind of the bad part, and Judah was kind of the good part. But in the end, they both really turned against God. So first, the part called Israel was destroyed, and the only people left were the ones called Judah. Eventually, Judah was taken away. Judah was taken away by a nation called Babylon, okay? And so that's where Daniel's story starts. Daniel was one of the very first people who was kidnapped out of Babylon. What basically happened is that the king of Babylon, I know some of you guys don't like the way I say his name, Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar. Are you guys good with that pronunciation? Okay. I always said it Nezer, but
You said it wrong.
okay. Nebi. We could do Nebi.
Nebuchadnezzar. It's also a
So King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. In fact, let me give everybody a map so you can see this. There's a modern day map of that area and a map of what it looked like in Daniel's day. Okay, so here's a map of what these areas look like today. Babylon, you can see this, where it says Babylon and it has a little dot, that's where the capital of Babylon is. Babylon is really like this whole big nation that's moving in. Kind of like, United States is a big country, but the capital is Washington, D.C. All you see here is a little dot that says Babylon, and that's the capital of Babylon, but it also takes up basically this whole area. What they were doing was invading. They were coming in. Babylon wanted to rule the whole world, and they pretty much did for a while. Back then, when people said the whole world, all that they really knew about was like the Middle East and some other places. You stretch out into Asia, stretch up into Europe and Africa, but this is what they really considered to rule the world, was this part in the middle. They didn't know about this whole side of the planet yet. So anyway, Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar and his father, they were trying to rule the world. And Nebuchadnezzar goes up. Do you see this river that's going up from Babylon? That's called the Euphrates River. And so Nebuchadnezzar was chasing the king of Egypt, which was, I can't think, his name was, what was his name? I forgot his name. He was chasing the king of Egypt, which was called a pharaoh. He was chasing the pharaoh towards Egypt, and he chased him all the way along the Euphrates River up to this place called Karshemish, however you say that. And then he chased him down to Egypt. and Egypt is down here under that Mediterranean Sea, which you can see over on the right. Now, he chased him away, and the king of Egypt basically got away, and Nebuchadnezzar said, okay, well, I'm just going to go back home. So he started heading back home, and as he was heading home...
Because I'm really lost.
Okay, he chased him up to Carchemish, and then he chased him down along this Mediterranean Sea coast to underneath the Mediterranean Sea. Down there is where Egypt is. He chased him back to Egypt, yeah.
I just have a question. So what's the sea?
That sea right there, that's the Mediterranean Sea.
Well, I'm just saying, I thought it was land.
Oh, you thought it was land. The white part is land, and the bluish thing, or not blue, the hazy thing is the Mediterranean Sea.
So all this, is this the Babylon,
Yeah.
all this white area?
That's basically what they were taking over, yeah, slowly. They were just moving in and invading. Eventually, it was their whole area. So, Nebuchadnezzar, he chased the king of Egypt back down to Egypt. And he says, well, I'm just going to go back home because this guy's basically kind of gotten away, but I've chased him off. That's what I wanted to do. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I want to head back home. And as he's heading home, he goes by this town called Jerusalem. And he sees it from a distance. And he sees God's temple there. And he says, and Jerusalem, at that time, it was the land of Judah. And their capital was Jerusalem. And as he's going by, he sees it and he says, hey, that is a pretty interesting structure, that temple of God. And he thinks it kind of catches his attention. So he sneaks over there kind of and looks at it from a distance. And he said, he sees people going in and he sees people doing their worship for God, in the Old Testament way. And he finds it just really intriguing. So he says, let's kidnap a few of these people and take them home with us as we're on our way back home to Babylon. He says, I think I'd like to take this area for myself. He says, so let's kidnap a few people and let's learn how these people work. And then in a few years, we'll just come back and take the whole area, as part of our conquest, because they wanted to rule the world. So his plan was to kidnap some of them and just basically learn what Jews are like, see if he can merge Jews with Babylon. And whenever he does that, then he knows how to take the rest of the nation away. That was his great plan. Now, through the story of Daniel, Daniel is a great example because every time he tries to make Daniel forsake his Jewishness and become more Babylonian, Daniel always puts his foot down and says, nope, I'm not going to do it. And he always stands his ground. And so that's what makes Daniel such a great example for us. Any questions so far about what his plan was? Okay, so he just kidnaps a few Jews while he's going by. And the year that this happened, I put it up here on the thing. This is where Daniel's story starts. The year is 605 BC. That means 605 years before Jesus was born. That's whenever Daniel's story is starting here.
Is that when he kidnapped the first people?
That's when he kidnapped the first people. Now, he didn't take very many. He actually just took a few young people. The people he took were Daniel, his three friends, who will later be known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He takes them. He takes a few other people, and he carries them off to Babylon, the capital. And so they're his captives. And so the first thing I want you to know is that's just when Daniel's story begins. Now, about 20 years later, almost, he will come back and he's going to say, I'm going to try to kidnap the rest of the people from Judah. And so the rest of the people in Jerusalem and all the Jews, the rest of them are going to be kidnapped in 586 BC. That's not really going to be dealt with in this book, but that's a very important date in Bible history because it's when the Babylonian captivity was completely underway. All the Jews were taken to Babylon at that point. They lost their homeland. There's lots of books in the Bible about this event, and so that's why I want you guys to know this date. So we'll continue. Just a few notes about Babylon. You might say, well, where is Babylon today? Babylon is later going to be destroyed. It's going to be wiped out by a different empire, a different group of people who want to take over the world. So Babylon will be destroyed. Now, Babylon the city, it's on your map, Babylon the city actually still exists. And you can see it down here on the lower portion of the map. You see where Israel is, and you see that little star, and that's where Jerusalem is in Israel. Now, if you look over a couple countries away, you see Iraq right there. And the star there in Iraq, that is Baghdad. That's the capital of Iraq. However, if you look in the word Iraq and you see the letter A in the word Iraq, that would be where Babylon is today. And so what I would just want you guys to remember, the city of Babylon is located in modern-day Iraq. You might just want to take a note of that.
Did you know like kidnapped him? Like,
How they kidnapped him?
like they throw a sack over and
They could have. I honestly don't know. They could have just came with some of his men and their spears. I think he basically had an army traveling with him, and then he sees Jerusalem from a distance and goes and sneaks up on them and investigates. I don't know how exactly he got a few of them, but he did. Wouldn't have been that hard. Okay, now Babylon, it was an evil place, and God had been telling them, he had been telling Judah for years. Judah is, if you're confused, what is Judah, what is Israel, we'll just call it Israel. God had been telling Israel for years, you guys are being bad. You're not doing what I told you. You're not following the rules that I laid out. You're being rebellious. He laid out specific things that they were doing wrong. We don't have to go into all of them, but he says, you guys are misbehaving, and so I am going to have Babylon come in and teach you guys a lesson, basically. He said, one thing he said, you guys are supposed to rest your land every 7 years. Now, it's not really that big of a deal. I mean, farmers don't do that today. It's not like you can't farm if you don't rest your land every 7 years, because I don't know that my dad ever has done that. But God said to do it, and they weren't obeying. And so that's what it came down to, honestly. It's that God said to do something, and they weren't listening. So 70 times they were supposed to rest the land 1 year, and they never did it. And so God told them, since you haven't rested that land for 1 year, since you've done that wrong 70 times, I'm going to force you guys to rest your land. I'm going to take you away from your land for 70 years. And so that's what God told them. He said, I'm going to have Babylon take you away. It's going to last 70 years. He had told prophets to tell them all this in the past, and they still didn't listen. And so they were finally taken away. Now, Babylon is an evil nation. They're bad dudes, okay? But even though they're bad, this is what God said he wanted for the land of Babylon. He said back in Jeremiah, before they were even kidnapped, he said, build houses and dwell in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and give daughters, so that you may be increased there and not diminished. So God was saying, I still want you to just flourish. Even though you're in this evil nation, it doesn't mean I want you guys to just throw up your hands and give up. He says, I want you guys to flourish there. I want you guys to do good. He said, seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it. For in its peace, you will have peace. So he said, even though you're being taken away by these evil people, I want you to pray for them. He says, because think about it. If Babylon's not doing good and you guys are in Babylon, then you guys aren't going to be doing good. So God told them, pray for it, seek the peace of that city. You're their captives. You're going to be there for 70 years, but be good captives. That's what God was telling them. And he said, you guys can still grow. Even though you're in Babylon, Israel can still grow. The Israelites can. So that is the first lesson of Babylon, and that should be a lesson for us too. We should not say, I hope God destroys America. I hope all this bad stuff happens to America. I've never said that, and I don't like it when Christians say that, because I'm like, dude, we live in America. Do you want bad stuff to happen to us? But people say stuff like that, and they don't really think about it. That's not what God told them to do about Babylon. He said, pray for Babylon. And so whenever we're in America, and America's not as bad as Babylon yet, and I don't know if they ever will get as bad as Babylon, but we need to pray for America too, and we need to pray for our nation and pray for our leaders and treat them respectfully, and not just throw up our hands and say, well, I just give up, this is too hard to live here, or something like that. So we will get into Daniel chapter 1 in a second. There's one more thing I want to show you about it. One more thing I want you guys to know about, and since this is the introductory lesson, there's all this stuff we have to go over. The PowerPoint for this one will probably be the biggest, because there will probably be the most stuff to write down. So don't get overwhelmed and think I'm trying to lay too much on you. This is probably the biggest one. But then there's two ways to read Daniel. There is the numerical order, which is how it appears in our Bibles. You can also read it in the chronological order, and that's the way we're going to study it this summer. We're going to go through it in the chronological order. The way the book of Daniel is laid out, it is not chronological the way it's laid out. I'll explain why that is. First, let's look at the bottom part right here where it says the numerical order. The book of Daniel is split into two parts. The first 6 chapters are called historical narrative. Historical narrative just means stories, history stories, things that actually happened in history. So they're true events, and that's what the first 6 chapters are, where we're going to have things like Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel, and the dreams that he was interpreting, that's in the first 6 parts, the first 6 chapters, okay? So that is called historical narrative. Now, the chapters 7 through 12, those are a different type of writing called apocalyptic literature. It's still Daniel writing it, but apocalyptic literature is future events. And so in those chapters, the second half of the book, God is telling us stuff about the end times. Some of it is stuff that's already happened, because there are things that happened regarding like what the future of Babylon was going to be, what the future of other countries were going to be. Some of those things have already happened, and some of them have not happened yet. And so Daniel is giving prophecies about future kingdoms and the Antichrist and other leaders who came up in history. And so we're going to learn stuff about the end times there. And so I don't know, I think both of those are pretty interesting. The stories about the past and apocalyptic literature, stories of future events, both of those are pretty interesting to me. You guys might prefer one over the other. That is the numerical order of Daniel. However, what we're going to study it in is the chronological order. And so I've put that up above too. And I would like you guys to memorize this. It's going to be like, at first it might seem like it's too complicated, but it really isn't. It goes like this: chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 5, 6, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. And I put that in order up there. And the way to remember, really kind of an easy way to remember, I'm just going to put it up here in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You guys see that? Now, all that's really happened to get this in chronological order, the first 4 here, those just stay in order. The last 4 stay in order. Chapters 9, 10, 11, 12, all that stays where it is. The only ones that switch are chapters 5 and 6, they go over here, and chapters 7 and 8, they go over here. You guys see that? That's kind of the easiest way to remember how it lays out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, then we're just jump over to 7 and 8, then 5 and 6, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. So that'll definitely come up like on the quiz. I'll say, what is the chronological order of Daniel? And you'll have to tell me 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. You don't have to do it that fast, but it's not that hard to figure it out. All right, you guys want to break? Whenever we get back, we'll go through that first chapter of Daniel. But that was all of the layout of Daniel and the history behind it.